Hey Year 12s! Today we're discussing The Mind of a Thief by Patty Miller in relation to identity and belonging. If this isn't one of your texts, or you haven't watched the video on identity and belonging yet, stop, go watch that first and then come back. There are 4 possible texts you could be studying for identity and belonging, of which this is one. Make sure you're not watching videos for texts you're not studying. Alright, on to The Mind of a Thief, which I'll just call Thief or The Book from now on. This memoir-style novel is pervaded by the ideas of identity and belonging, as she attempts to examine not only her own history, but that of her community in Australia as a whole. Much of the novel focuses on Australian Indigenous heritage and how this is influenced by relationships with land and oral storytelling. If you're hoping to use Miller as inspiration for creative writing, or you want to analyze her style in a bit more depth, consider the following. Narration style. The novel is narrated in first person, which allows the reader to go on a journey with Miller. This can be seen at the very opening of the novel, when Miller relays her experience. "Do you have any blackfella in you? The skinny woman across the room is looking directly at me." Personal versus historical. Miller blends together these two seemingly incongruous styles throughout the novel. This is emphasized through the weaving of historical and legal stories, bound together in a shared focus on Miller's heritage. Non-linear time frame. The novel weaves past and present narratives without moving forward in a strictly chronological sense. Instead, it jumps forward and backward in time, using memories and historical accounts, framed by the event that prompted Miller to look into her heritage. Dialogue. Dialogue is written the way it is said, including colloquialisms and contractions. This gives a certain realness to the story. It is almost as if the reader can hear the true voices of the people who Miller interviews. More importantly though, let's look at the big ideas of identity and belonging which emerge from Thief. First, let's discuss the way in which the book reflects the big idea of how identity is formed. The opening chapter of Thief sees the narrator consider if her identity would change with the knowledge that she has Aboriginal heritage. In doing so, she raises several considerations about the factors that influence a person's sense of self. Some of the important considerations within the book which contribute to an individual's sense of self include physical appearance, upbringing, gender, age, and race. On physical appearance, Miller identifies that she's as white as they come when confronted with the possibility that she has a family connection with the Aboriginal woman she's speaking to. Her understanding of self has clearly been shaped by the firm belief that she was, as she later describes herself, a thief of Aboriginal lands. At the very least, her appearance and way of speaking creates an automatic disconnect with the woman she is speaking with at the meeting. Upbringing. Throughout the narrative, Miller weaves in stories from her childhood, demonstrating that they have a profound influence on the person who she is today. In particular, she looks to her understanding of Aboriginal people as a child to make sense of her reaction to her discovery that she may have a shared history with the Wiradjuri community. Gender. Miller's exploration of her own gendered roles, and those of the women around her as wives and mothers, raises questions of the influence that gender plays on one's identity. Age and maturity. The point in time from which Miller is writing becomes an increasingly central focus throughout the memoir, because she's shown to be going through a period of change and readjustment, in turn influencing her sense of self. Race. Given the novel's focus on Aboriginality and the history of Australia, race plays a significant role, influencing a character's sense of self. Race is explored not only in relation to what a character looks like, but also the ancestry of that character as well. For the individuals who identify as Aboriginal, this connection is not based on appearance, but a deeply personal, ongoing connection to the landscape and their heritage. Next, let's consider the ways in which Miller suggests that this sense of identity can change over time. The very first pages of this novel opens the question of how identity can be affected by new knowledge. Specifically, that Miller is affected by the knowledge that she may have Aboriginal heritage. This reflects that identity is not just influenced by the groups that we belong to in our upbringing, but our ancestry and understanding of culture as well. In addition to this, the novel's movement back and forth through time allows Miller to depict the ways that her identity, and the identities of those around her, has shifted with age and new experiences. Finally, let's look at the other side of this context, the ways in which Thief comments on the importance of a sense of belonging. The novel focuses intensely on this theme, posing the question, what does it mean to be Australian, given that Australia is stolen land? Miller explores not only her own sense of Australia, but the cultural environment of this country through historical and metaphorical stories as well. The notion of belonging being important is not explored exclusively in relation to white Australians within Miller's text. Through interviewees who are fighting to retain their connection to land and traditional culture, Miller portrays the detrimental effect white settlement has had on Indigenous Australians, not just historically, but in an ongoing sense as well. Much of this is portrayed through native title claims, such as that of Rosechown in the wake of the Mabo decision. Mabo is portrayed as a watershed in Indigenous and colonial relationships, and you should try to approach this text with some background knowledge of that case and what it has meant for Indigenous land claimants. It is a problematic decision for Indigenous people. It produces some obvious tangible benefits in the form of potentially successful historical claims to land, but it does mean accepting the rule of colonial law in Australia. Moreover, the dispute between Rosechown and Joyce Williams and her supporters reveals the way in which colonial law fails to handle the complexities of Aboriginal connection to land and the historical displacement of Indigenous peoples. Importantly, the differing opinions of Indigenous characters represents a wider theme in Miller's story, that to belong to a group is not necessarily to conform to it. The disputes and differing stances of many of the interviewees is a reflection of the fact that is sometimes forgotten in colonial history and conceptualizations. Indigenous culture and people are in no way homogeneous. While the different characters would identify as Indigenous and recognize that they are linked by their shared history and culture, they do not share the same perspectives. Their sense of self and understanding of the world is not purely dictated by the opinions of the group, but of many factors working together. This is just a bit of a taste of identity and belonging within the mind of a thief, but hopefully it gives you some good talking points for your next context piece. Make sure to check out the video on identity and belonging and how to write different context pieces. Thanks for listening and happy writing.